Story 1. I didn't believe the old warning about the whistle until I heard it answer me from inside the forest, because I had been a park ranger in the Appalachian Mountains for 7 years, and I thought I knew the difference between a strange sound and something worth being afraid of. But on that cold October night, 3 miles up Devil's Backbone Trail, I learned that some sounds aren't meant to be explained. They're meant to tell you that you are already too late. My shift had started normally. A couple had reported seeing an abandoned campsite near the upper ridge, and because the area had recently been hit by heavy rain, my supervisor asked me to check whether anyone was stranded. Before I left, an older ranger named Mason stopped me beside the equipment room and asked where I was going. When I told him, he went quiet. Then he said, "If you hear somebody whistling, don't whistle back." I laughed and asked if he was serious. He didn't laugh. "I'm serious," he said, "and if it sounds close, don't look for it." I remember thinking he was trying to scare me, but Mason had worked those mountains for almost 30 years, so I nodded and left. By 10:40 that night, the trail was completely dark. Clouds had covered the moon, and a low fog moved between the trees like smoke. My flashlight showed only wet leaves, twisted roots, and the narrow trail disappearing ahead. I reached the reported campsite shortly before midnight and found exactly what the hikers had described: a small fire pit, an old tent, and a backpack sitting beneath a tree. The strange thing was that the tent looked occupied. I called out, "Park ranger, is anyone in there?" Nothing. I called again. Still nothing. Then I heard a whistle somewhere to my left. 3 short notes, clear and sharp. I immediately remembered Mason's warning. I stood perfectly still and tried to convince myself it was a bird. Then the whistle came again. 3 notes, this time from directly behind me. I didn't turn around. I slowly reached for my radio and called dispatch, but all I got was static. The whistle came a 3rd time, closer than before, and I could hear footsteps in the leaves. 1 step, then another. They stopped right behind me. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Then a man whispered, "You found my camp." I spun around. There was nobody there. The trail behind me was empty. I looked at the tent again and noticed that the zipper was slowly moving downward from the inside. I raised my flashlight. The zipper stopped. I called out, "If you're injured, answer me now." Nothing. Then the whistle sounded from inside the tent. 3 short notes. I backed away. The zipper began opening again. Slowly. I could see darkness inside, but no person. Then something crawled forward. At first I saw a hand, pale and covered with mud. Then another hand. I stepped backward, but before the thing could emerge, a voice came from my radio. "Ranger, leave the campsite." It was Mason. I grabbed the radio. "Mason, where are you?" He answered immediately, "Don't answer anything you hear. Get off the ridge." I asked him what was happening. For several seconds there was only static. Then Mason whispered, "It's using the whistle again." I looked toward the tent. The hands were gone. The tent was empty. My radio suddenly transmitted another voice. "Ranger?" It was my supervisor. "Why did you leave the trail?" I looked at my GPS. My location marker was blinking somewhere far from the official route. I looked around and realized the trail had disappeared. There was no path beneath my feet anymore, only forest. I started walking in what I thought was the direction of the ridge, but after 10 minutes I found the same abandoned campsite again. Same tent, same backpack, same fire pit. This time, however, there was a man sitting beside the cold ashes. He was facing away from me. He wore an old ranger uniform. I raised my flashlight and called out, Sir? He slowly turned his head. I recognized him immediately. Ranger Mason. But Mason was supposed to be back at headquarters. His face was pale, his uniform soaked, and there was dried blood running from one ear. He looked at me and whispered, "You answered it." I asked what he meant. He pointed toward the trees. The whistle. I told him I hadn't whistled back. He shook his head. "You answered when it spoke." Then he suddenly looked terrified. "Don't let it hear your voice again." I lowered my radio. "Mason, what is this place?" The man sitting before me smiled, but his voice changed. It wasn't Mason's anymore. It was mine. "You tell me." I ran. I crashed through branches and stumbled downhill, no longer caring about the trail. Behind me came the whistle. 3 notes. Then another whistle answered from somewhere ahead. 3 notes. Then another from the left. Soon the entire forest was whistling around me. I covered my ears, but I could still hear it. It wasn't coming through the air anymore. It was inside my head. I reached a creek and stopped. The water was black beneath my flashlight, but I remembered another old ranger saying that if you ever get lost on the mountain, follow running water downhill. I stepped into the creek and started moving along the bank. That's when I saw the footprints. They were all mine. Hundreds of them. My boot prints covered the mud, leading up and down the creek as if I had been walking there for hours. I checked my watch. It was 12:17 a.m. Then I remembered looking at my watch at the campsite. It had been 12:17 then too. The whistle came from across the creek. I looked up and saw myself standing on the opposite bank. Same uniform, same flashlight, same terrified expression. The other me raised one finger to his lips. Then he pointed behind me. I didn't want to turn around, but something was breathing directly against the back of my neck. I slowly looked over my shoulder. A tall figure stood in the creek less than 6 feet away. It was wearing a ranger uniform, but its face was hidden beneath the shadow of a wide ranger hat. Water dripped from its sleeves. One hand hung at its side. The other was raised to its mouth. It whistled 3 notes. I ran again. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually I saw the glow of headlights through the trees. My patrol truck was parked at the trailhead. I almost cried when I saw it. I reached the vehicle, unlocked the door, jumped inside and locked it again. I started the engine. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the whistle came from the back seat. 3 short notes. I froze. I looked into the rearview mirror. Nobody was there. Then my radio switched on by itself. Mason's voice came through. "Don't turn around," I whispered. "Where are you?" He said, "I'm at headquarters." I gripped the steering wheel. "Then who did I see?" Mason was silent for several seconds. Finally, he said, "Did it have my face?" I didn't answer. "Listen to me," he continued. "That thing on the mountain has been there longer than the park. It copies people who hear the whistle and answer it. The first time you hear it, it knows where you are. The second time, it knows what you sound like. The third time," his voice broke apart in static. I shouted, "The third time what?" Then the radio answered in my own voice. "The third time, it comes home with you." I looked toward the rearview mirror again. This time there was someone sitting behind me. It was me. The other version of me was soaking wet, staring directly into the mirror. Slowly, he lifted one finger to his lips. Then he began to whistle. 3 short notes. I drove all the way back to headquarters without looking behind me again. When I arrived, Mason was waiting outside. He opened my truck door and immediately stepped back. I asked him what was wrong. He looked into the back seat. Where's your hat? I reached up. My ranger hat was gone. Mason pointed toward the rear seat. Sitting there was an old ranger hat, dripping creek water onto the floor. Neither of us touched it. We left the truck locked overnight. The next morning, the hat was gone. So was every radio log from my patrol. My GPS showed that I had never left headquarters, but there was one new recording on my radio. It was only 9 seconds long. At first, there was silence. Then I heard 3 short whistles. After that came my own voice, trembling and distant, saying, "I found the trail." Then another voice answered, "No, Ranger, the trail found you." I quit night patrols after that, but the whistle never really stopped. Sometimes I hear it outside my house after midnight. 3 notes. Always 3. I never answer it. I never look outside. But last night, for the first time in 7 years, the whistle came from inside my bedroom. And somewhere in the darkness beside my bed, something whispered in my own voice, "Your shift starts again tonight." Story 2. I was already 2 hours into my patrol when I found the poster nailed to a tree. And before I even got close enough to read it, something in my chest told me to turn around and leave, because there are certain things you can see in the Appalachian wilderness that your mind understands before your eyes do. And a missing person poster with your own photograph on it is one of them. The night had started with a routine call about a lost hiker near an isolated mountain trail known locally as Widow's Pass, a steep section of wilderness that hadn't been officially closed but was rarely used after dark because GPS signals disappeared there, and several hikers had reported hearing voices coming from places where no one could possibly be standing. I was the only ranger close enough to respond, so I parked at the old trailhead shortly after 11 and started climbing. The air was cold and wet, and fog moved through the trees so heavily that my flashlight seemed to hit a white wall 20 feet ahead. For the first 40 minutes, everything was normal. Then I found a backpack hanging from a branch. It wasn't placed on the ground or caught on the tree. Someone had deliberately tied it there with a piece of rope. I cut it down and searched inside. There was no identification, no wallet, no phone. Just an empty water bottle and a small notebook. On the first page, someone had written, "If you find this, don't keep walking." I stopped reading. On the second page, the handwriting became shakier. "The trail is longer when you are alone." I immediately checked my radio and called dispatch. "This is Ranger Hale. I may have located evidence belonging to the missing hiker." Static answered me. I tried again. Nothing. Then the radio crackled, and a woman's voice whispered, "Don't tell them where you are." I froze. It wasn't dispatch. "Who is this?" I asked. No answer. Then the same voice whispered, "He can hear the radios." I switched the radio off. The trail ahead was completely silent. Even the wind had stopped. I looked down at the notebook again. The next page had a map drawn in pencil. A line marked the trail, and near the top, someone had written, "Do not follow the red markers." I raised my flashlight and immediately saw one, a small red reflector nailed to a tree. I knew it hadn't been there when I came through. I turned around. Another red marker stood behind me. Then another appeared farther down the trail. I suddenly realized they were everywhere. Red dots glowing in the darkness, forming a path through the forest. I started walking in the opposite direction, but after several minutes I came across the same backpack again, hanging from the same tree. I knew it was the same one because the rope had been cut. My hands began shaking. I opened the notebook. A new sentence had appeared on the page. "You should have taken the red trail." I dropped it. Then I heard someone walking behind me. Slow footsteps. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause. I didn't turn around. I grabbed my flashlight tighter and started walking faster. The footsteps matched me. I stopped. They stopped. I took one step. Another step came behind me. Then a man's voice whispered, "Ranger?" I turned. Nothing. The voice came again, closer. "Please, help me." I raised my flashlight. Still nothing. Then I heard crying somewhere ahead. A young man was sobbing. "I don't know where I am." I followed the voice for perhaps 50 yards before seeing a figure sitting on a rock beside the trail. He was wearing a hiking jacket and had his hands covering his face. I approached carefully. "I'm a park ranger. Are you the missing hiker?" The man slowly lowered his hands. His face was covered in scratches. "Yes," he whispered. I asked his name. He gave me the name from the missing person report. I told him we were going back to the trailhead. He immediately grabbed my wrist. His hand was freezing cold. "No." I asked why. He pointed toward the darkness behind me. "You can't go back the way you came." I asked him what he meant. He whispered, "That isn't the trail anymore." I turned my flashlight around. The path behind us was gone. There was only a steep wall of trees. I looked back at the hiker. "How long have you been out here?" He stared at me. 3 days. I knew he had been missing for 9 years. I didn't tell him. I asked where his camp was. He pointed deeper into the woods. "I woke up here after I heard someone calling my name." I asked who. He looked terrified. "Me." Before I could respond, my radio turned on inside my pocket. Dispatcher's voice came through loud and clear. "Ranger Hale, return to your vehicle immediately." I grabbed the radio. "Copy." The missing hiker screamed. "Don't answer it." Every red marker in the forest suddenly lit up at once. The hiker released my arm and ran. I chased him, but within seconds he disappeared into the fog. Then I saw something nailed to a tree directly ahead. A missing person poster. I walked closer. The photograph was mine. My name was printed beneath it. The words said, "Missing. Last seen entering Widow's Pass Trail." Below that was a date. Tomorrow's date. I stared at it until my flashlight started flickering. Then a voice behind me said, "They haven't found you yet." I turned. The missing hiker was standing there. But he wasn't wearing the hiking clothes anymore. He was dressed in an old park ranger uniform. My uniform. He looked at the poster and said, "You always find this part confusing." I asked him what he meant. He smiled sadly. "Because every time you come back, you forget." I stepped away. "Come back from where?" He pointed at the forest. "The mountain doesn't take people." I waited. He continued. "It returns them." Then something began moving between the trees. Tall figures, one after another. I counted 6 at first, then 10, then more than I could see. They were all wearing different clothes. Some wore hiking gear. Some wore old ranger uniforms. Every one of them had my face. I ran. I don't remember choosing a direction. I just ran until the trees opened into a clearing. In the center stood an old wooden sign with dozens of missing person posters nailed to it. I recognized names from old cases. Hikers who had vanished. Rangers who had disappeared. Then I saw dozens of posters with my photograph. Each had a different date. One from 8 years ago. One from 5 years ago. One from last winter. One from tomorrow. I tore one down and looked at the back. Written in pencil were 4 words. "You came back wrong." Behind me, the hiker began laughing. I spun around. He was gone. Instead, a man stood at the edge of the clearing wearing my exact uniform. He looked exhausted. His face was bruised. I recognized him immediately. It was me. But he looked older. Much older. He held up both hands. "Don't run," he said. "I'm the one they haven't replaced yet." I asked him who he was. He looked toward the posters. I'm what you were before the trail learned you. My radio crackled. Dispatch called my name. The older version of me looked terrified. Don't answer. I switched the radio off, but the voice continued coming from the forest. Ranger Hale, your location has been found. Another voice answered from somewhere behind me. My voice. I'm here. The older me grabbed my arm. We have to move before it chooses which one gets out. I asked what he meant, but the ground beneath us began shaking. The red markers in the trees turned on one by one. The clearing filled with a strange red glow. Then every poster began fluttering even though there was no wind. The older version of me whispered, "When the lights go out, follow me. Don't look at anyone who calls your name." The lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed the clearing. Immediately, voices began calling from every direction. My mother, my supervisor, old friends, dispatch, the missing hiker, all of them calling my name. Then I heard myself crying somewhere close by. Please don't leave me here. I kept my eyes closed and followed the sound of footsteps ahead. Suddenly a hand grabbed mine. I assumed it was the older version of me. I opened my eyes. It wasn't. The missing hiker was holding my hand, smiling. Behind him stood the other versions of me. Dozens of them. He whispered, "This one wants to go home." I ripped my hand away and ran toward a faint light between the trees. Branches struck my face, roots caught my boots, and something crashed through the forest behind me. I could hear footsteps everywhere. Then I saw my truck. I had never been so relieved in my life. I reached it, jumped inside, locked the doors, and started the engine. The clock on the dashboard read 4:12 a.m. I looked toward the passenger seat. The missing person poster was sitting there. I hadn't brought it with me. I picked it up. The photograph showed me standing at the trailhead. Underneath was a new message. Found. I drove back to headquarters without stopping. When I arrived, the night shift supervisor was waiting outside with 2 other rangers. He stared at me through the windshield. I got out and asked why everyone looked so frightened. He didn't answer. He simply said, "Where have you been?" I told him Widow's Pass. He shook his head. "You were supposed to patrol Widow's Pass tomorrow." I told him I had just come from there. He opened his phone and showed me the date. My patrol had been scheduled for the following night. I had lost an entire day. Then one of the rangers quietly asked, "Who was driving your truck?" I turned around. The truck was empty. He showed me a security camera image from 5 minutes earlier. It showed my vehicle arriving at the station. I was in the driver's seat, but another version of me was sitting beside me in the passenger seat. I looked at the actual truck. The passenger door slowly opened by itself. Nobody stepped out. Then, from inside the vehicle, I heard 3 slow knocks against the dashboard. My radio switched on. A voice whispered, "Ranger Hale." We found the real one. I never went back to Widow's Pass, but the missing person posters still appear. Sometimes one is nailed to a tree outside my house. Sometimes one is lying on the hood of my truck. The photograph is always different. In some, I'm walking into the woods. In others, I'm standing beside the ranger station. Last week, I found a new one on my bedroom door. It showed me asleep in my bed. Beneath the photograph were the words, "Last seen, last night." And from somewhere outside, deep beyond the trees, I heard someone whistle 3 short notes and whisper, "This time, don't come back." Story 3. I first heard his voice at 2:13 in the morning, and the strange thing was that Ranger Cole had been missing for 11 years. So when his call sign suddenly came through my radio, asking me to come get him off the mountain, I almost dropped the microphone into the mud. The official explanation for Cole's disappearance had always been simple. He went searching for a lost family during a storm. Radio contact stopped near the northern ridge, and neither he nor the family were ever found. I knew the case well because every new ranger in our Appalachian district was shown the report during training. Cole's photograph still hung in the old station hallway, his uniform neat, his expression serious, a warning without anyone ever saying it was one. That night, I had been sent to check an emergency beacon near a remote section of trail called Crow's Hollow. Heavy rain had flooded the lower paths, and thick fog covered the mountains so completely that my headlights disappeared into it. I parked at the last service gate, grabbed my pack, and started on foot. 20 minutes into the hike, my radio crackled. Unit 7, this is Ranger Cole. Do you copy? I stopped. Nobody used Cole's call sign anymore. I picked up the radio slowly. Identify yourself. Static filled the speaker. Then the voice came again, weaker this time. I'm on the mountain. I can't find the trail. I asked dispatch whether they were hearing it. Dispatch answered immediately. Hail, what transmission? I held the radio closer, the one from Cole. Silence. Then dispatch said, Hail, Cole has been dead for 11 years. I knew that already. Before I could answer, Cole's voice cut through again. Don't tell them where I am. I froze. Cole, I whispered. Is that really you? His breathing came through the speaker. Please, he said, don't let them send anyone else. Then the transmission ended. I checked my GPS. The emergency beacon was still another mile ahead, but a new coordinate had appeared on the screen, blinking north of my position. There was no mountain marked there. According to the map, the land beyond that point was a deep valley. I should have ignored it. Instead, I followed the signal. The forest changed almost immediately. The trees became thicker, older, and strangely close together. My flashlight began flickering, and every few minutes I heard rocks falling somewhere above me, even though there was no visible slope. After nearly 40 minutes, the ground began rising. I climbed higher and higher, until I emerged onto a ridge I knew shouldn't exist. I looked behind me. The valley had disappeared beneath a sea of fog. Ahead stood a mountain, a massive black shape rising into the clouds. I checked my map again. Nothing. No trail. No peak. No name. Just blank terrain where the mountain was standing. My radio crackled. Cole whispered, You found it? I asked him where he was. At the cabin. I told him there was no cabin. He said, There wasn't when I arrived either. I followed a faint path upward. As I climbed, I began seeing things that didn't belong there. An old child's shoe beside a tree, a rusted search team helmet, a broken ranger badge half buried in the mud. Then I found a radio. It belonged to Ranger Cole. His call sign was engraved into the metal. I pressed the transmit button. Cole, I found your radio. The voice on my own radio immediately answered. Then don't pick it up. I dropped it. A second later, the radio lying on the ground began speaking in my voice. I found his radio. I stepped back. Both radios went silent. The trail led me to a small cabin near the summit. It was built from dark wood and looked much older than the park itself. Smoke was rising from the chimney. I called out, Ranger Cole? The door slowly opened. A man stood inside. He looked exactly like the photograph from the station wall, except his uniform was torn and his hair was longer. You took your time, he said. I stared at him. You've been missing 11 years. He looked confused. I've been here since yesterday. I stepped inside because the wind had suddenly become unbearable. The cabin was warm, too warm. There were maps covering every wall, but none of them showed the mountain we were on. Cole pointed to dozens of red marks scattered across the Appalachian region. Every mark is someone who found the way up, he said. I asked him what happened to them. He looked toward the window. They're still looking for the way down. I asked him about the missing family. He didn't answer. Instead, he opened a closet. Inside were backpacks, dozens of them. Each had a name tag. Missing hikers, rangers, search volunteers. One backpack was mine. I laughed nervously. That's not possible. Cole looked at me with fear in his eyes. What year do you think it is? I told him. He backed away. No, he whispered. That's impossible. He ran to the wall calendar. The date on it was 11 years earlier. The exact night he had disappeared. I checked my watch. The time was 2:13 a.m., the same time I had first heard his voice. Suddenly, every radio in the cabin turned on at once. Different voices came through. Dispatchers, rangers, search teams, missing hikers. They were all calling for help. Then one voice said my name. I looked toward the window. A figure was standing outside in the fog. It was wearing my uniform. I went to the door, but Cole grabbed my arm. Don't open it. The figure outside raised its head. It had my face. Then it spoke through the radio. Hale, come outside. I backed away. Cole whispered. The mountain copies whoever arrives last. I asked what that meant. He pointed toward the door. That's you. The figure knocked 3 times. Cole shut off the light. Don't let it see you move, he whispered. We stood in darkness while the knocking continued. Then the figure outside began walking around the cabin. Each time it passed a window, I saw my own face staring inside. Finally, it stopped behind the cabin. The silence was worse than the knocking. Then something heavy hit the roof. The whole cabin shook. Cole grabbed his radio and whispered, It's trying to get in. I asked him what it was. He looked at me. I don't know, but it wasn't here when I first arrived. The radio crackled. Dispatch called me. Hale, respond. I raised the microphone. Cole slapped it from my hand. Don't answer them. I asked why. He whispered, They're not at headquarters anymore. Then a familiar voice came through the radio. My supervisor. Hale, we found your location. I shouted. Where am I? He answered. That's what we're trying to figure out. The transmission cut out. The roof creaked. Something began crawling across it. Cole opened a trapdoor in the floor. We can leave through here. I looked down. There was a tunnel beneath the cabin. I asked where it went. Down. I followed him. The tunnel was narrow, cold, and filled with old equipment. Every few yards, we passed objects belonging to missing people. Then we reached a chamber where dozens of trail signs were piled against the wall. I recognized several from different Appalachian parks, some hundreds of miles apart. Cole stopped beside a sign marked Crow's Hollow. This is where it begins, he whispered. Suddenly, the tunnel behind us filled with the sound of footsteps. Slow, heavy, coming closer. Cole switched off his flashlight. I did the same. In the darkness, I heard my own voice whispering, I know you're here. The footsteps stopped. Then something brushed against my shoulder. I ran. Cole ran beside me. We burst out of the tunnel and found ourselves back on the ridge. But the cabin was gone. The mountain was gone. We were standing in the valley where the map said we should be. I looked at Cole. He looked at me. Did we make it? He asked. Before I could answer, my radio came alive. Dispatch shouted, Hale, respond! I grabbed it. I'm here. Dispatch went silent. Then my supervisor said, Who are you with? I looked beside me. Cole was gone. There was only a wet ranger uniform lying on the ground. His old uniform, 11 years old. I called his name, but no one answered. Search teams arrived at sunrise. I told them everything. They found no cabin, no mountain, and no tunnel. But they did find Ranger Cole's radio buried beneath a tree. The batteries had been dead for years. My supervisor opened Cole's old case file and found something we had all missed. Cole's final radio transmission had been recorded. We listened to it together. Static, heavy breathing. Then Cole's voice said, "I found the mountain." A second voice answered him. It was mine. "Stay where you are. I'm coming up." I stared at my supervisor. The recording was 11 years old. I hadn't been a ranger then. I hadn't even worked in that state. The room went silent. Then my radio, sitting on the desk, switched on by itself. Cole whispered, "Hale." I couldn't move. "I'm still on the mountain," I asked. "Where?" His voice became terrified. "Behind you." I turned slowly. The station wall where Cole's photograph had always hung was empty. The photograph was gone. In its place was a map. A new black mountain had been drawn in the northern valley. At the summit was a small red mark. Beside it, someone had written my name. Underneath, a second name had appeared. Ranger Cole. And from somewhere deep inside the station, I heard the sound of boots walking uphill. Story 4. I first noticed him at 1:07 in the morning, standing perfectly still at the edge of the Appalachian tree line. And at first I assumed he was another ranger waiting for me. But then I remembered something that made me stop breathing. There were only 2 rangers assigned to that entire mountain, and I was supposed to be the only one working that night. I had been sent to patrol a remote trail after campers reported seeing a man in a ranger uniform standing near the same overlook every night, never moving, never answering, and always facing the forest instead of the trail. Most of the reports had been dismissed as a misunderstanding because the mountain was known for strange shadows and thick fog. But the last camper who reported him had added one detail that bothered my supervisor enough to send me out. The man had been standing there when they arrived at sunset, and he was still standing there at sunrise. I reached the overlook shortly after midnight. The weather was cold but clear, and the moon gave just enough light to see the trees below. The overlook was empty. I checked the surrounding trail, called into the forest, and found nothing. I radioed headquarters to report that the area was clear. Then I heard a branch snap behind me. I turned. A man stood near the edge of the trees. He wore an old park ranger uniform, darker and more outdated than mine. His back was facing me. I called out, "Ranger, identify yourself." He didn't move. I walked closer. "Sir?" Nothing. I was perhaps 20 feet away when I noticed something strange about his boots. They weren't resting on the ground. They were slightly above it, hovering just enough that I could see darkness underneath. I stopped. The man slowly raised one hand and pointed toward the forest. I followed his finger. Deep between the trees, I saw a light. It looked like a flashlight moving uphill. I looked back at the ranger. He was gone. I searched the area for almost an hour but found no footprints. Then dispatch called me. "Hale, status check." I told them what I'd seen. There was silence. Finally, my supervisor asked me to describe the uniform. When I did, he told me to return immediately. I asked why. He didn't answer. He just repeated, "Leave the overlook now." I started back toward the trailhead, but after 10 minutes, I heard someone walking behind me. I assumed it was the ranger. I turned. Nobody. I continued. The footsteps continued. I stopped. They stopped. Then a voice whispered from directly behind my shoulder, "You saw me." I spun around. Nothing. I ran. I reached my truck and drove back to headquarters before 2 a.m. My supervisor was waiting outside. He took me into the office and opened an old archive file. Inside was a photograph of a ranger standing at the same overlook. The uniform was identical to the one I had described. The photograph had been taken in 1987. The ranger's name was Robert Keene. He disappeared during a winter storm and was never found. My supervisor pointed at the photograph. He was last seen standing at the overlook. I asked why he would still be there. My supervisor looked toward the window. He's not the only one. I thought he meant other missing rangers, but then he showed me another photograph from 1996. A ranger standing in the same spot. Another from 2008. Another from 2017. Every photograph showed a different ranger, standing motionless and facing the forest. I asked what happened to them. He closed the folder. The ones who look at the light disappear. I remembered the flashlight moving through the trees. My stomach tightened. That night I couldn't sleep. At exactly 1:07 a.m., my radio turned on. Static filled the room. Then a voice whispered, "Come back." I switched it off. The voice continued. It was coming from outside my bedroom window. "Come back." I didn't look. The next morning, my supervisor assigned another ranger to patrol the overlook with me. His name was Daniel, and he had worked there longer than I had. When I told him about the hovering boots, he became pale. "You saw his feet?" he asked. I said yes. Daniel stopped walking. "Then don't go tonight." I asked why. He said, "Because now he'll show you where he's standing." I laughed nervously, but Daniel didn't. He told me that the old rangers believed the overlook wasn't an overlook at all. It was a doorway to a part of the mountain that only appeared after someone watched the light. I asked him if he believed that. He didn't answer. We reached the overlook shortly before midnight. For the first hour, nothing happened. Then at exactly 1:07, Daniel grabbed my arm. "There." The old ranger was standing at the tree line. Same uniform, same position. This time, Daniel called his name. "Keen!" The figure slowly turned. His face was pale, frozen in an expression of terror. His mouth opened, but instead of speaking, he began screaming. The scream didn't sound human. It sounded like dozens of people screaming at once. Daniel fell backward. The figure raised one hand and pointed toward the forest. The light appeared again. This time it was closer. I could see someone carrying it. A woman. She was walking uphill toward us. Daniel whispered, "Don't look at her face." I lowered my flashlight. The woman came closer. She wore hiking clothes from another time, old boots, an old jacket. She stopped at the edge of the overlook. Her face was hidden by her hair. "Ranger?" she asked. I didn't answer. "My husband is lost," she whispered. Daniel pulled me backward. The woman lifted her head. Daniel screamed and covered his eyes. I saw her face for 1 second. It was mine. I ran. Daniel ran behind me. The old ranger remained standing at the tree line, pointing toward the forest. The woman's voice followed us. "Wait for me." We reached the trailhead, but Daniel wasn't beside me anymore. I called his name. No answer. I returned to the overlook at sunrise with the search team. The area was empty. We found Daniel's radio lying on the ground. His last transmission had been recorded at 1:09 a.m. I listened to it. Daniel was breathing heavily. Then he whispered, "There are 2 of hail." My blood went cold. The recording continued. My voice said, "Daniel, come here." Then Daniel screamed. The recording ended. I asked the search team if they had seen me during the night. They looked confused. One of them said, "You came back here around 2. I told him that was impossible. He pointed toward the tree line. "He was standing right there." I followed his finger. There were 2 sets of footprints in the mud. One belonged to my boot. The other was Daniel's. Daniel's prints ended at the trees. Mine continued into the forest. I never found Daniel. 3 days later, a camper sent the ranger station a photograph he had taken from the overlook at night. The image was blurry, but I could see the old ranger standing at the tree line. Beside him stood Daniel, and beside Daniel stood me. All three of us were facing the forest, perfectly still. The camper had written one sentence in the email. "I took this at 1:07 a.m. Who is the fourth ranger?" We zoomed into the photograph. Behind the three figures, deeper in the darkness, stood another ranger. He was pointing directly at the camera. My supervisor immediately shut down the overlook. Nobody was allowed there after dark. But closing a trail doesn't stop people from going. Last month, a hiker ignored the signs and camped near the overlook. His phone was recovered the next morning. He was gone. The final photograph on his phone showed the same tree line. 4 rangers were standing there now. Robert Keane, Daniel, me, and a fourth figure wearing the hiker's jacket. All of them faced the forest. At exactly 1:07 every night, I still receive a radio transmission. Daniel's voice comes through, weak and far away. "Hale, don't come back." Then another voice interrupts him. It sounds exactly like me. Too late. He's already standing here. Story 5. I had been a park ranger in the Appalachian Mountains for nearly 8 years before I learned that a locked building can be far more frightening than an abandoned one, especially when you know for certain that nobody is supposed to be inside, and yet, the moment you touch the door, something on the other side knocks back. My patrol that night began with a missing person call from a section of mountain known as Hollow Ridge, an old stretch of trail that had been closed to the public after repeated landslides made it unsafe. Nobody should have been there, but just before sunset, a hiker's emergency beacon had activated somewhere near the closed trail. I was sent to investigate before a search team arrived. My supervisor gave me the coordinates, then stopped me as I was leaving and said, "If you find the old ranger cabin, don't open it." I asked him why. He looked uncomfortable. "It's supposed to be gone." I thought he meant the cabin had collapsed or been demolished, but he didn't explain. By the time I reached Hollow Ridge, the sun had disappeared behind the mountains. The forest was silent except for the sound of wind moving through the upper branches. I followed the emergency coordinates for nearly an hour before my GPS suddenly froze. The screen went black, then came back with a single message where the map should have been. "Turn back." I tapped the screen, restarted it, and checked my paper map instead. The beacon location was still another half-mile uphill, so I kept going. 10 minutes later, I saw a faint orange light between the trees. At first, I assumed it was the missing hiker's flashlight, but as I moved closer, I saw the shape of a small wooden cabin. It stood alone in a clearing, surrounded by old trees. Smoke rose from the chimney. I stopped. There was no cabin marked on the map. I walked closer and saw an old metal sign beside the door. Hollow Ridge Ranger Shelter. The letters were faded, but still visible. The front door was secured with a thick chain and a rusted padlock. I touched the lock. 3 knocks came from inside. I immediately pulled my hand away. Knock. 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 I stood there listening. Then a man's voice whispered through the door. "Ranger?" I didn't answer. The voice came again. "Thank God." He sounded weak and frightened. "Please let me out." I asked who he was. There was silence. Then he said a name matching the missing hiker I had been sent to find. I checked the report on my phone. Same name. I asked him how he got inside. He whispered, "I heard someone calling for help." I asked if he was injured. "Yes." I told him I was going to get the door open. The voice immediately changed. "No." I froze. "What?" I asked. The man whispered, "Don't unlock it." I stepped back. "You just asked me to let you out." Another voice came from inside. A woman's voice. "Please open the door." Then another man began shouting. Then someone started pounding against the walls. The entire cabin shook. I backed away. My radio crackled. My supervisor's voice came through. "Hale, do you see the cabin?" I asked how he knew. He didn't answer. Instead, he said, "Walk away. Now." I asked what the cabin was. He whispered, "It burned down 32 years ago." I stared at the building. Smoke continued rising from the chimney. I asked him if he was serious. He said, "The ranger inside died in the fire. We locked the remains and buried them." Before I could respond, something slammed against the door from inside. The chain rattled. The missing hiker screamed, "Don't listen to him!" My supervisor shouted through the radio, "Hale, leave!" Then every light inside the cabin went out. The knocking stopped. I stood frozen for several seconds. Then I saw a shadow move past the window. I raised my flashlight. A face appeared against the glass. It was the missing hiker. His eyes were wide with fear. He mouthed one word, "Run." I ran uphill, away from the cabin, but after several minutes I heard my radio transmit behind me. "Hale!" I turned around. The cabin was gone. There was only forest. My radio repeated, "Hale, come back!" I kept moving. Then I found the emergency beacon lying on the trail. I picked it up. It belonged to the missing hiker. Beside it was his backpack. Fresh blood covered one strap. I called for backup. This time, dispatch answered. "Search team is on the way." I gave them my coordinates. Then I heard knocking. Knock, knock, knock. It was coming from inside the backpack. I dropped it. The backpack fell open. Nothing was inside except a small notebook. I picked it up with shaking hands. Every page contained the same sentence, "Don't open the cabin." The final page had different handwriting. "If you're reading this." I opened it. I heard a branch snap behind me. The missing hiker was standing between the trees. He looked exactly like the face I had seen at the cabin window. His clothes were soaked, and blood ran down his arm. "You heard them too," he said. I asked him if he had been inside. He nodded. I opened it. I asked what was in there. He looked toward the darkness. "Nothing." I waited. He continued. "At first." The forest suddenly became silent. The hiker grabbed my sleeve. "Don't let it lock you in." I asked him what he meant. He looked past me. His face changed. I turned. The cabin was standing behind us again. The door was open. The chain was gone. Warm orange light spilled across the ground. My supervisor screamed through the radio, "Do not go inside!" The hiker began crying. It followed me out. I asked him what followed him. He pointed toward the open doorway. A figure stood inside the cabin. It was wearing a park ranger uniform. Its face was hidden in shadow. It raised one hand and slowly waved at me. The hiker screamed and ran. I chased him, but after only a few seconds I lost him in the trees. Then I heard a loud crash behind me. I turned around. The cabin door had slammed shut. The chain was locked again. From inside came 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. My radio went silent. My flashlight flickered. Then I heard someone knocking from directly beneath my feet. I jumped backward. Knock, knock, knock. The sound moved through the ground, following me as I ran. I finally reached the main trail just before dawn. A search team found me sitting beside my truck. I told them about the cabin and the hiker. They searched Hollow Ridge all morning. They found no cabin, but they did find something else. A stone foundation buried beneath leaves. The remains of the old ranger shelter that had burned down 32 years earlier. Inside the foundation, they found a rusted padlock and part of a chain. The lock was still closed. My supervisor showed me an old newspaper article about the fire. The cabin's ranger had become trapped inside during the blaze. Witnesses reported hearing him knocking on the door for nearly an hour. The rescue team couldn't reach him. When the fire finally died, the cabin had collapsed. His body was never found. I asked about the missing hiker. My supervisor shook his head. He was never reported missing. I showed him the emergency beacon report on my phone. The report was gone. My call history showed nothing. Then he handed me a photograph recovered from the old cabin case file. It showed the ranger who died in the fire standing outside the shelter. I recognized him immediately. He had been the figure in the doorway. My supervisor pointed at the photograph. That's Ranger Malcolm Voss. I asked what happened to his body. My supervisor looked toward the mountains. We never found it. That night, I received a new emergency beacon alert on my phone. The coordinates led to Hollow Ridge. The message read, "One person trapped inside." I ignored it. 5 minutes later, another message appeared. 2 people trapped inside. I turned off my phone. Then another alert appeared. 3 people. The number kept increasing. 10, 20, 50. I threw the phone across the room. The screen cracked, but the alerts continued. Then my bedroom door made 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't move. A man's voice whispered from the other side. "Ranger." It was the missing hiker. Thank God. I closed my eyes. Then another voice whispered behind him, my own voice. "Please let us out." The knocking started again, louder this time. And then I realized something that kept me awake until sunrise. The knocks were not coming from the hallway. They were coming from inside my bedroom walls. Story 6. I was halfway through my night patrol when I saw the trail marker, and I knew immediately that it shouldn't have been there, because I had hiked that section of the Appalachian Mountains more times than I could count. Yet there it was, a fresh wooden marker nailed to an old oak tree, pointing into a section of forest that every official map showed as completely impassable. What made me stop wasn't the marker itself, but the name carved into it, Ranger's Rest, 2.7 miles. There was no Ranger's Rest anywhere in the park. I called dispatch and asked if a new trail had been opened. The dispatcher checked the database and replied, "Negative. Stay on your assigned route." I should have continued. Instead, I noticed something hanging beneath the marker. It was a small metal ranger badge, blackened with age. I picked it up and saw a name engraved across the back. Daniel Mercer. I knew the name. Mercer had been a ranger in that district 22 years earlier and had disappeared during a winter patrol. His truck had been found at the trailhead. His body had never been recovered. I slipped the badge into my pocket and continued along my route. But after another 100 yards, I found a second marker. Same wood, same lettering, same arrow. This time it pointed directly behind me. I turned around. The trail I had just walked was gone. There were only trees. I checked my GPS. The device showed me standing exactly where I should have been, but the trail line on the screen had vanished. Then my radio crackled. A man's voice whispered, "Don't follow the markers." I asked who was speaking. The answer came after several seconds. "Mercer." I froze. "Daniel Mercer," the voice whispered. "You found my badge." I reached into my pocket. The badge was still there. I asked him where he was. 3 miles ahead. I looked at the impossible trail. "How do I get out?" He answered, "You don't." Then the transmission ended. I stood there for several minutes before hearing footsteps behind me. I turned. Nothing. Then a branch snapped farther down the trail. Something was moving between the trees. I started walking. The trail became narrower as I went, and the forest seemed strangely old. Trees twisted around one another. Roots covered the ground. and every few minutes I passed another marker. Each one had a different ranger's name carved into it. Some names were familiar from old missing person reports. Others I had never heard before. Then I saw a marker with my own name. I stopped so suddenly my flashlight slipped from my hand. The marker looked brand new. Beneath my name was a date. Tomorrow's date. I backed away. My radio came alive. "Keep walking." It was Mercer. "Why?" I asked. "Because it already knows you stopped." I looked into the forest. At first I saw nothing. Then two pale eyes appeared between the trees. They were too high above the ground to belong to a person. I picked up my flashlight and ran. The eyes followed. I could hear branches snapping behind me. I reached a small clearing and found an old ranger cabin. The windows were boarded. The door was open. Inside, dozens of ranger jackets hung from hooks. Every jacket had a name stitched onto it. Mercer, Daniels, Wallace, Grant. Several belonged to rangers who had disappeared decades ago. At the far end of the room was a wooden table. On it sat a radio. It turned on by itself. "Hale," Mercer's voice. "Look under the table." I didn't want to, but something compelled me. I crouched and looked underneath. There was a notebook. I pulled it out. The first page said, "If you found the trail, it has already chosen you." The following pages described the same thing I was experiencing. Markers appearing where no trail existed. Voices coming through radios. Rangers seeing their own names. The final entry was dated 22 years ago. I understand now. The trail isn't taking us somewhere. It's bringing something to us. I heard the cabin door close behind me. I spun around. The room was empty. The radio crackled. Mercer whispered, "Don't open the door." I asked why. "Because it isn't outside." I slowly looked toward the ceiling. Something was crawling above me. I could hear claws scraping across the wooden boards. Dust fell onto my shoulders. I backed away. The sound moved toward the attic. Then the attic door opened. A dark figure lowered itself through the opening. It was wearing an old ranger uniform. Its limbs were unnaturally long. Its face was hidden beneath a ranger hat. It stepped onto the floor and raised its head. I saw my own face. I ran through the nearest window. Glass cut my hands, but I didn't stop. The trail outside had changed again. Every tree was covered in red markers. Hundreds of them. Each pointed in the same direction. I heard footsteps behind me. The creature was following. I ran downhill until I reached a stream. I remembered something Mercer had written in the notebook. Running water confuses it. I stepped into the stream and moved downstream. The footsteps stopped. I looked back. The creature stood on the bank. It wouldn't enter the water. I thought I was safe. Then it smiled. My radio crackled. "You made it to the water?" I grabbed the radio. "Mercer?" He answered. "No." I froze. The voice continued. "It's me." It was my voice. "Look across the stream." I slowly turned. On the opposite bank stood another version of me. Same uniform. Same face. Same flashlight. It raised its hand and waved. Then it stepped into the water. The creature on the other bank remained still. I realized there were two of them. I ran downstream as fast as I could. The stream eventually widened into a shallow river. I crossed and climbed the opposite bank. The forest suddenly looked normal. The strange markers were gone. The trail was back. My GPS started working again. I thought I had escaped. Then I noticed the ranger badge in my pocket. It was no longer Mercer's badge. The name had changed. It now read, Ranger Hale. I threw it into the river. The badge floated. It shouldn't have. I watched it drift against the current until it disappeared around a bend. I reached my truck shortly after sunrise. My supervisor was waiting. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. Then he asked me one question. "Did you cross the water?" I said yes. His face went pale. "Then it knows the way back." I asked what he meant. He opened an old case file. Inside were photographs of missing rangers. Each photograph had been taken after they returned from the mountain. They all looked normal. They all claimed they had escaped, and everyone disappeared again within a week. I asked what happened to them. My supervisor pointed to the final photograph. It showed Ranger Daniel Mercer standing beside a stream. Behind him was another version of Mercer. Both were looking directly at the camera. Underneath the photograph was a handwritten note. One came back. We don't know which one. I didn't sleep that night. At 3:27 a.m., my radio switched on. I heard footsteps outside my house. Slow footsteps. Then a voice whispered through the radio. "Ranger Hale." I didn't answer. "You left something on the trail." I looked toward the window. There was a wooden marker standing in my yard. It hadn't been there when I went to bed. I couldn't see what was written on it because the light was off. Then the radio whispered, "Turn on the porch light." I didn't. The voice repeated itself. "Turn on the porch light." Finally, I heard something scratching against my front door. 3 slow scratches. Then a whisper came from outside. "You forgot your badge." I looked down at the floor beside my bed. The blackened ranger badge was sitting there, the one I had thrown into the river. I didn't touch it. I haven't left my house since. But every night at exactly 3:27, the wooden marker outside my window gets a little closer. Yesterday, it was beside the driveway. Tonight, it is beside the front door. And carved beneath my name are 4 words I can't stop thinking about. The trail is open again. Story 7. I was told there was no child on the mountain, but I heard her crying anyway, and the sound was coming from a trail that had been closed for 40 years. A trail so dangerous that even experienced rangers were forbidden from entering it after sunset. Yet at 1:36 in the morning, while I was sitting inside my patrol truck listening to the rain hit the windshield, a little girl's voice came through my radio and said, "Ranger, please come find me. I had been assigned to monitor the lower section of an Appalachian mountain after several hikers reported hearing a child's voice coming from the forest. And when I first received the assignment, my supervisor told me not to investigate the sound unless I had visual confirmation of a person in distress. He said it casually, almost like standard procedure, but then he added something that bothered me. If the voice knows your name, don't answer." I asked him why. He looked at me for a moment and said, "Because the last ranger who answered it walked into the forest and came back without his shadow." I laughed because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. The rain became heavier around midnight, and thick fog began covering the lower trail. I checked my radio. Nothing. Then at 1:36, I heard the crying. "Please." It sounded like a young girl. I'm lost. I stepped out of the truck and raised my flashlight toward the forest. Nothing. The voice came again. "Ranger," I called back. "Are you injured?" Silence. Then the girl whispered, "You came." I froze. I had never told her I was there. My radio crackled. My supervisor's voice came through. "Hale, don't respond." I grabbed the microphone. "You heard that?" He answered, "Yes." Then he said something I still remember word for word. "The trail is active." I asked what that meant. He didn't answer. Instead, he told me to return to the station immediately. Before I could move, the girl's voice came from somewhere behind me. "Ranger Hale." I stopped breathing. My supervisor had warned me. If the voice knew my name, don't answer. I didn't. The crying continued. "Please help me." I slowly got back into the truck and locked the doors. Then I heard small footsteps walking around the vehicle. Tap, tap, tap. They stopped beneath my window. A little hand appeared against the glass. I jumped back. The hand was tiny, pale, and covered in mud. I didn't look at the face. The radio crackled. My supervisor whispered, "Don't open the door." The little girl knocked twice. "Ranger, I'm cold." I kept my hands away from the locks. Then she whispered, "I know you're inside." The hand disappeared. The footsteps moved away. I watched them through the windshield as two tiny footprints appeared in the mud. They walked toward the closed trail. I should have stayed in the truck. Instead, I followed them. I told myself I was only checking the perimeter. The footprints continued beneath the trees. They were small and bare. No shoes. I followed them for several hundred yards until I reached an old wooden sign almost completely covered by moss. It read, "Trail closed, 1986. Beneath the sign was another message carved into the wood. She never left. The crying started again. "Ranger." I raised my flashlight. The trail ahead was empty. Then I saw a small red coat hanging from a branch. I approached it slowly. The coat looked old, almost 40 years old, but it was completely dry despite the rain. Inside one pocket was a child's photograph. I turned it over. Written on the back was a name and date. Emily Carter, October 14th, 1986. I knew that name. Emily Carter was the child who had disappeared on this mountain in 1986. Her disappearance was one of the oldest cases in the park archives. Search teams had spent weeks looking for her. They found only one red coat near the trail. I held the coat in my hands when the girl spoke again. "That's mine." I looked toward the trees. A little girl stood about 30 feet away. She was wearing a white dress and had long dark hair covering most of her face. "Emily?" I whispered before I could stop myself. She lifted her head. "You found my coat." I asked where she'd been. She pointed deeper into the forest. "Home?" I asked where her home was. She smiled. "You already passed it." Then she turned and began walking. I followed despite every instinct telling me not to. The trail narrowed until the trees pressed against both sides. After several minutes, we reached a small clearing. In the center was an old cabin. I knew immediately what it was. It appeared in the old case records. Search teams had discovered the foundation years later, but the cabin itself had burned down before anyone could investigate it. Yet here it stood, intact. Smoke rose from the chimney. A warm yellow light glowed through the windows. Emily walked toward the door. I stopped. "Wait." She turned. "Don't you want to go home?" I asked. She smiled sadly. "I am home." Then she opened the door. I saw several people sitting around a table. Men, women, children, all wearing clothing from different decades. Some looked like hikers. Some looked like rangers. None of them moved. Emily stepped inside. One of the adults slowly turned toward me. It was an old ranger. I recognized him from the photograph in our station archives. He had disappeared in 1993 while searching for Emily. Then another figure turned. A ranger who disappeared in 2004. Then another from 2011. Every missing person connected to the closed trail was sitting inside that cabin. Emily whispered, "They've been waiting for you." I backed away. "Why me?" She pointed toward the table. There was an empty chair. My name was carved into the back. I turned and ran. Emily began screaming behind me. "Ranger Hale! Don't leave!" The people inside the cabin began shouting. Their voices followed me through the trees. "Come back! You promised! We're still waiting!" I ran until I reached the old trail sign. I thought I had found the main trail, but the sign had changed. The date now read 2026. Beneath it were fresh words. Trail closed tonight. My radio crackled. My supervisor said, "Hale, where are you?" I gave him my coordinates. Silence. Then he whispered, "You're inside the closed zone." I asked how he knew. "Because I'm looking at the map." He paused. "Your GPS signal is moving in circles." I looked at my device. The arrow was spinning. Then I heard the girl's voice behind me. "Ranger." I didn't turn. "You left something." I looked down. Emily's red coat was lying beside my boots. I hadn't brought it with me. I stepped away from it. The coat moved slightly in the wind. Then something fell from its pocket. A small metal ranger badge. I picked it up. It had my name engraved on it. My supervisor suddenly shouted through the radio, "Hale, get out now!" Then another voice interrupted him. It was Emily. "Don't listen to him." I covered my ears. Both voices began talking at once. My supervisor screamed instructions. Emily whispered promises. Then a third voice joined them, my own voice. "Come home." I ran blindly through the trees. I stumbled down a slope and landed beside a creek. The water was moving quickly. Across the creek stood a ranger. He raised his flashlight. "Hale!" I recognized him. It was the ranger who had disappeared in 2011. He shouted, "Don't cross!" I asked why. He pointed behind me. Emily was standing among the trees. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her face was twisted with anger. "You can't leave," she whispered. The ranger across the creek shouted, "The water is the boundary." Emily stepped forward. The trees around her began bending inward. I jumped into the creek and crossed. The moment I reached the other side, everything stopped. Emily disappeared. The ranger disappeared. The cabin disappeared. The forest became normal. I reached the main trail shortly before sunrise. A search team found me several hours later. I told them everything. They searched the closed zone and found the old cabin foundation. Nothing else. No Emily. No missing rangers. No red coat. My supervisor told me the story was over. I wanted to believe him. Then he showed me a photograph taken by a trail camera that morning. It showed me standing beside the creek. Across the water stood Emily. She was holding the red coat. But something was standing behind her. A tall figure wearing a park ranger uniform. The figure had no face. My supervisor zoomed in. There was a name stitched across the uniform. Mine. I quit night patrols after that. I never returned to the mountain, but the park still receives strange reports from hikers. They say that sometimes, after midnight, they hear a child crying from behind the old closed trail sign. Most people keep walking. Some stop. Last month, a new ranger ignored the warning and went looking for her. He disappeared before sunrise. His radio was found beside the trail. The final transmission lasted only 6 seconds. First came a little girl's voice. "Ranger, please come find me." Then the ranger answered, "I'm here." After that, another voice whispered through the radio. It sounded exactly like me. "You shouldn't have answered." And somewhere deep in those mountains, a child began laughing.